So I want to turn back the clocks a little bit to the spring and remark on an extraordinary event, a really extraordinary event that took place in the Clanton Park neighborhood. And I'm proud to say that some of our Beth Tikvah members were there in attendance and were participating. This was not your typical community gathering. It was a group of people who were brought together by convictions. Let's pretend we're in kindergarten and say that last word together. Convictions. The Coen family, an Israeli family with 4 children, was living temporarily in Toronto. Their 2 older boys in grades 5 and 8 had been dealing with relentless anti-Semitic bullying at Faywood Arts-based curriculum school since they came to Toronto 3 years ago. With their strong Israeli accents, these kids stood out, and it didn't take long before they became targets. After October the 7th, the bullying escalated dramatically, with incidents of death threats, shoving, and physical intimidation. Sadly, the Toronto District School Board didn't seem equipped or willing to handle the situation. Adi, the boy's mother, tried every official channel to protect her children. Yet despite her best efforts, the bullying continued. As their time in Canada drew to a close, the family was getting ready to go back to Israel, relieved to leave behind what had been an excruciating experience. Think for a moment about the idea of the family looking forward to returning to an Israel at war rather than remaining in a Canada plagued with anti-Semitism. But just about a month before the end of school, there was a dramatic escalation. As their oldest son, Eitan, was walking to school one morning, students threw sticks, stones, and a water bottle at him. And in addition to the usual death threats, they told him, "We will do to you what Hamas did to Israel." Adi decided that she was done being quiet. She filed a police report, and she organized a community walk to send her son to school with dignity and with a message. So on a Friday morning in May, some of you read about this, about 150 people showed up to Eitan's home and walked with him to school. There were no flags, there were no loud chants, just quiet determination. A few politicians couldn't resist the chance to speak, of course, but the message that morning was not political. It was personal. It was a message to the TDSB, a message to the city, and most importantly, to Eitan and every other Jewish student. You are not alone. You deserve to be safe in school. We will not tolerate anti-Semitism, and we won't tolerate bullying. The event drew lots of media attention. It was really quite inspiring. During this very difficult year, I'm grateful for this gift that the Coen family gave to us here in Canada before they went home. And I think it truly was a gift. They could have gone back to Israel quietly, but they chose to teach us something very important before they went back home. A lesson that we needed to hear, a lesson that is typically Israeli, a lesson in courage, a lesson in not backing down, a lesson in standing firm for your convictions. If you think about it, what happened to Eitan Cohen on the schoolyard is a microcosm of the harassment and bullying that is happening in the world today on many, many different levels. Just as bullies in the schoolyard use aggression and intimidation to assert dominance or gain control, so do nations and ideologies around the world increasingly resort to force, to violence, to threats to advance their agendas. The same dynamics of power, fear, and manipulation that are present in childhood bullying are really at the root of larger conflicts where instead of finding solutions through dialogue and cooperation, people and governments are choosing war and aggression to impose their will on others. And just like the Coen family, we are left with a choice. What is that choice? A common choice leads towards the pragmatic. To be a pragmatist means, whether the conflict is large or small, to work towards a resolution quickly and painlessly, to negotiate, draw a truce, even when you have to compromise on your principles. We in Canada, we like this approach. We are a nation that generally shies away from confrontation. We're the ones known for saying sorry even when we've done nothing wrong. If Israelis adopted that way of thinking, friends, I don't think there would be an Israel today. The gift that Adi Cohen gave us before her family returned home was the gift of challenging our Canadian pragmatism and choosing an alternative, to be conviction-driven. Being conviction-driven means that your moral and ethical principles come first. Even when there are practical challenges, even when a more immediate solution might be more enticing. In a dangerous world filled with bullies, we need principled people and principled leaders, prepared, as the Torah portion suggested last Shabbat, to be nitzavim, to stand up straight, even when the wind blows hardest. The Torah tells the story of a man who was set apart because of that very quality. The Torah is very vague about why God chose Abraham to be the father of the Jewish people, but it is much more precise in explaining why God chose Moses. In the second chapter of the book of Exodus, 3 encounters immediately precede Moses' selection by God as leader. The first, Moses goes out from his very comfortable life in Pharaoh's household and finds an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. What he beholds affects him deeply. He cannot bear it. Moses pounces upon the Egyptian, kills him, hides his body in the sand, and saves the Hebrew slave. The second occurs the next day when Moses goes out and sees 2 Hebrew slaves fighting with each other, Datan and Aviram. Moses again cannot bear what he sees. He intervenes here too, He doesn't kill anybody in that scene, but he confronts them and gets involved and saves the weaker from the stronger. The third encounter occurs after Moses flees to Midian. He sees some shepherds around the well, and some young ladies are there too. And he sees the shepherds trying to harass these young ladies and take advantage of them. Now keep in mind that after Moses' first two interventions, he's lost everything. His appeal to justice has left him destitute, with no family, no home, no belongings. And darn his luck, the moment he leaves, he's confronted immediately upon his arrival in Midian with another moral dilemma. If he was smart, he would have just minded his own business and stayed quiet. But he doesn't. Here, too, Moses cannot bear what he sees. He confronts the shepherds, and not only does he drive them away, he helps bring water to help these young ladies feed their flock at the well. It is right after these three stories when God appears to Moses at the burning bush and appoints him leader of the Jewish people. There is no question in my mind that the preceding events determine the subsequent appointment. Moses, the most important character in the Torah, is appointed leader of the Jewish people because of a principled stance against bullying, because of an insistence that bullies have to be stopped, because of his convictions. Whether it's a non-Jew bullying a Jew like it was in the first incident, whether it's two Jews fighting with each other like it was in the second incident, or whether it's a non-Jew bullying another non-Jew like it was in the third incident, there is no excuse for bullying in the Torah. And this allegorical lesson later becomes codified in Jewish law. The legal term applied to a bully in Jewish law is a rodef. Rodef literally means pursuer. In criminal matters, Jewish law is very strict that an accused criminal is entitled to certain rights and a due process. This includes warnings and a trial and proper witnesses. The standard for a criminal conviction in Jewish law is very, very high. But for a rodef, someone in the midst of pursuing you with the intention to harm you, do you know that none of this applies? When it comes to a rodef, it is a mitzvah according to Jewish law. That is, you are obligated to take justice into your own hands. You deal with the issue on the spot. That rule applies whether you are the victim yourself or whether you are a bystander, like Moses was. A commandment that might be familiar to you. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Do not stand idly by while your brother's blood is being shed. The justification for this mitzvah delves deeply into the psychological nature of bullying and why bullying can be so effective. We have the picture in our minds of bullies, perhaps, as caricatures like Butch from The Little Rascals, and maybe victims as stereotypical underdogs like Alfalfa. But these images oversimplify and obscure the reality. Research shows that bullies come in all forms, but they do share one common trait. They lack empathy, and they are driven by a need to dominate or assert power over others. Bullying isn't limited to physical intimidation. It is about exploiting someone else's weakness to achieve control over them, often through fear and psychological manipulation. Victims, too, defy simple categories. They can be any height, any weight, any intellectual ability. But they also are united by a common trait, and that is they tend towards a particular response. They yield power to the bully, whether through compliance, emotional withdrawal, or resignation. Victims give the bully exactly what they seek: control. And when you submit control, it emboldens the bully. It perpetuates a cycle of escalating aggression. That is why standing firm, as the Torah teaches, is not just a matter of self-defense, but a critical stance against the growth of cruelty and oppression. That was Adi Cohen's message. She said, we're standing firm. We're not going to let this go anymore. My son is going to walk to school with his head held high. We're not just going to quietly return to Israel, which would only encourage further harassment. We're reporting this to the police, and our son will be surrounded by people who stand with him, declaring that the Jewish community knows its history, understands its moral strength, and will not stand idly by while the student is bullied. For the Coen family, this occurred in the schoolyard. But there is workplace bullying and bullying within marriages and within families, and there is bullying between nations. The desire for power, coupled with a lack of empathy, it drives bullies of all sorts in all places. And don't get me wrong, there are times when pragmatic approaches ought to be explored. Shalom is one of the highest values in Judaism, and to make peace, you sometimes do have to compromise on your values and make concessions. But that always comes with a danger. I will never forget several years ago teaching a class here at Beth Tikvah on Shalom Bayet. Shalom Bayet means having peace in the home. And one of the students in my class stood up and said that she was in an abusive relationship for many years, and that people used to tell her to stay with the guy because of Shalom Bayet. It wasn't until she ended up in the hospital that she finally stopped listening to them. Was the last class I gave on Shalom Bayet. When the stakes are high, friends, the pragmatic must give way to the principled. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was so wise when he taught in Pirkei Avot, Al Shlosha Dvarim ha'olam omed, the world stands on three things: Al Hadin, on justice; Al Ha'emet, on truth; Ve'al Hashalom, and on peace. You need all three. Without justice and truth, peace is hollow, and the world will crumble. And so today I am submitting to you this Rosh Hashanah that in the face of a world polluted with bullies of all shapes and sizes, we are in desperate need of people who have convictions, people who can lead with their convictions, people who have principles. We need principles in the Jewish community. They burned our signs a few months ago on Bayview Avenue, our UJA appeal signs, so we put them back out the next week. We had to do it twice later. They knocked over our menorah at Hanukkah. Put it right back up. You come into our communities with your flags of hate, we'll use every resource at our disposal to make sure you regret it. We need principles in this city. You want to set up a tentifada outside our college and university? We're going to walk by proudly with our heads held high. And we're going to sue every university in this country until every Jewish student can walk to class free from harassment. We need the right to protest in this city, but when those protests violate laws, we are going to demand a police that is empowered to impose immediate, firm, and heavy consequences. We need principles in this world. This world was built following the Second World War very deliberately and paid for by tremendous blood and sacrifice. A world where international borders were to be respected and the rule of law would be defended. People are entitled to have different nationalistic aspirations, entitled to different religious beliefs, and entitled to debate what is fair and just when it comes to disputed territory. But we have a principle that people are not allowed to turn towards violence in order to impose their will on others. That needs to be a red line. And that is a principle that must be defended. And that is why we need principles for Israel. There are many different opinions with regards to how Israel should be fighting this war. And I don't have the right answer for you, but what I will say is that there should be no debate that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself against its bullies. It must, it is obligated to confront its bullies. Hamas and Hezbollah and Haniya and Nasrallah and Hezbollah and Iran and everybody else. A ceasefire might seem pragmatic now. There's that Canadian part in all of us that says de-escalate. But it also sounds a lot to me like advocating for Shalom Bayet while your partner is abusing you. Like letting a bully go unchallenged in the schoolyard. Like the failed British appeasement policies against Hitler in the 1930s. De-escalation and ceasefire, that's not the Jewish legacy. Western leaders on both the left and the right are guilty of engaging in pragmatic rather than conviction-driven leadership when it comes to defending our values. And what that's created is a world where bullies are empowered. They don't go away. They fester and they multiply. Instead of confronting the problems, we put them on the back burner, nonetheless spending more and more money on military defense, preparing for a conflict that we don't want to deal with now, but will gladly pass on to the next generation. In effect, what the world has done, it has bound its children to the altars of war that they built to their false gods. As tomorrow's Torah reading, the binding of Isaac, forbids us from doing. We need a different path. We need different leadership. We need people who have convictions. Thank you, Medinat Israel, for showing us what it looks like to be the true children of Moses, our teacher, and lead by convictions. Today begins a new year in a dangerous world. Maybe last year you skimmed by who shall live and who shall die. This year, those words ought to speak to each and every one of us. They relate to present-day experiences and fears and anxieties. That is our life. Who is going to live and who is going to die? Now is the time for us to rise up with strength, with purpose, and with a conviction that is unwavering. We are not a people who shirk in the face of adversity, nor are we a people who negotiate with those who would see us disappear. Our history is one of resilience, and our future must be written with the same resolve. We are heirs to a tradition that has always stood firm against oppression and injustice. Let us draw on the fire of our ancestors, the courage of Adi Cohen, the wisdom of our Torah to say, we will not be moved. We will confront bullies and hatred head on, build stronger communities, and fight for the principles that make us proud Jews, proud citizens, and proud defenders of human dignity. Together we will stand undaunted, unbreakable, and unwavering for this world which will and must and will continue to stand on justice, on truth, and on peace. Shana Tova.